Hi, I'm Mandy Medley. I'm one of the workers and co-owners at Pilsen Community Books, and I am so glad that you could join us here tonight to celebrate David Adjmi's new memoir, Lot 6. Pilsen Community Books is a used and new bookstore in the heart of Chicago's beloved Pilsen neighborhood, and as of March of this year, we are now worker-owned and operated, which is really exciting for us. A couple of notes about how this event will go. I'll introduce Suzanne Scanlon, who I'm so excited is joining us tonight, and she'll introduce David, and David will read a bit of his work, and then they'll be in conversation. And at the end of the event, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, so if you have any during the event, just drop them in the chat, and I'll read them at the appropriate time. And now, without further ado, I'll introduce Suzanne. Suzanne Scanlon is the author of Promising Young Women, out from Dorothy in 2012, one of my favorite books, a novel in fragments about the life of a young woman in and out of institutions, and her 37th year in Index, from Noemi in 2015, a fictional memoir in the form of an index, following 1 year in a woman's life. Her work has appeared in the Iowa Review, the American Scholar, Electric Literature, Bomb Magazine, Brooklyn Rail, and many other places. She teaches at the School of the Art Institute Chicago and in the University of Iowa Summer Writing Festival. So without further ado, Suzanne.
Hi everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Mandy, and thank you to the bookstore for hosting us. We're really grateful and happy to be here. And I'm so excited to help celebrate David Adjmi's first book, a memoir, Lot 6, which is just an incredible book. And I will read a brief introduction of David here for you, for any of you who don't know him. Of course, David, as I just pulled off my shelf, is a very accomplished playwright. This is a collection of his plays, stunning and plays. But this is a book he spent so much time on. David Adjmi is the author of numerous plays, including stunning Marie Antoinette, The Evildoers, and Stereophonic. He was awarded a Mellon Foundation grant, the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Whiting Writers Award, many other awards, and residencies from many places. He lives in Los Angeles, and he's going to read a little bit for us from his memoir now. David?
Thank you. Thanks, Sue. Oh, crap. I can hear myself. Ooh, I hear an echo. I'm going to turn my volume all the way down so I don't hear it. Okay. Thank you so much to the Pilsen Community Bookstore. I'm so excited to be doing this. So this, I am primarily known as a playwright. This book was commissioned by HarperCollins 10 years ago. I don't know why they commissioned it. I don't really understand what happened to me, but somehow I found myself writing long-form prose, and it was a harrowing, very difficult journey for the past decade, figuring out how to do this and why I was doing it and what it could be, what it should be. But I'm very happy that it's done. And the book ended up becoming, I mean, it's a lot of things, but it's not just a book about being a playwright. It's a book about sort of how I built a self, because I come from an environment that didn't necessarily feel native to me. I am from a small community in Brooklyn of Syrian Sephardic Jews. I guess the most prominent one that you might know is Isaac Mizrahi, who's also gay. So the go gay Syrian Sephardic Jews. But from Midwood. But anyways, I come from this small part of Brooklyn that is now, I guess, a little bit chic because all the rock stars moved there, like Sufjan Stevens or whatever. But at the time, it wasn't chic. And I wanted to get out and I wanted to become somebody else, I thought. And so the book is sort of charting this trajectory of me trying to create myself on the atomic level in these small increments and making all my weird, humiliating mistakes. And sort of on this trajectory towards my becoming an artist and a writer. So I'm going to read to you from a chapter called Save Us, Superman, which is sort of dead center smack in the middle of the book. And I had transferred a zillion times to different colleges, and I had gone to USC to study film, but realized I thought it was too commercial and I didn't like it. And I thought I'm going to go back to the East Coast where I belong, and I'm going to go to this very artsy school called Sarah Lawrence, and I'm going to become an intellectual because I had this idea that that would be a really good thing to be. I didn't really know what it meant and what was entailed, but I thought, no, this is a good idea. So this is from Save Us Superman. This is my first week at Sarah Lawrence, and I'm going to the Sarah Lawrence Library to read Nietzsche. I made my initial pilgrimage to the library, which was newish. No carved alcoves, no intaglios of dark lacquered wood, no rooms with rare folios. Instead, there was a Norwegian-feeling sunken floor area filled with oversized floor pillows. The room was encased with glass walls, like an aquarium, and shrouded with silence. If anyone dared whisper a single syllable, the whole room would turn against them with an enfilade of shh and dirty looks. With all my sensitivity to noises and movements, I was in ecstasy. I picked a pillow and sat with my copy of Beyond Good and Evil. It was like sitting with a box full of jewels. There were no courses that semester on Nietzsche, so I devised an independent study. I knew nothing of him except for quotes like God is dead and the Barbara Stanwyck movie I saw, where she turned into an ice-veined harridan after reading him. But Nietzsche seemed the most serious of philosophers, and I wanted to become a serious person. I gazed for a moment at the cover, which had the image of a beady-eyed man with a gigantic mustache. He wasn't handsome, but I wanted to caress his hideous face. I wanted to stroke his mustache that desperately needed grooming. I knew at that shining moment, lounging on my huge pillow, white Westchester light streaming through the tall glass walls, that my life was about to change. I could sense that this wasn't just a book, it was a passageway between realms. I closed my eyes and made myself empty inside, a receptacle for knowledge and nothing more. The first few pages were exhilarating, though Nietzsche activated my bad self-esteem. Reading him, at times I could feel myself adopting a fake posture, like I was at a dinner party and didn't want to betray my own stupidity. I'd never read philosophy before, except for Plato's Republic and a couple of Ralph Waldo Emerson essays. Nietzsche was nothing like Emerson. He was provocative and sort of intense, and at first I liked the provocations. But the further I got into the book, the more I felt my joy and anticipatory excitement turn to horror. The truth was that Nietzsche seemed kind of crazy. His writing was extremely overheated. He seemed to be shouting at you constantly. There was a lot of talk of hammers and an overuse of exclamation points. He hated women. He was demeaning to other philosophers. He compared people to apes and worms, and at one point he used the phrase pygmy animal, which sounded racist. He talked about things like pulling yourself up from a swamp of nothingness by the roots of your hair. I tried to picture myself ripping out my hair and pulling myself out of a swamp of nothingness, no less, and I felt sick to my stomach. I kept going like this, page after page. Nietzsche seemed deranged. But at the same time, the derangement in the writing seemed urgent and potentially important. He was cruel, but there was something bracing and lucid in all of the cruelty. Almost everything we call higher culture, he wrote, is based on the spiritualization and intensification of cruelty. Could cruelty be spiritual and beautiful? Could cruelty, if you just intensified it, be a portal into culture? A few pages in, he wrote, charity is a malady. And I thought of Richie, my charitable, obedient brother, whom Nietzsche would have hated. I thought of my mother's screeds about selfishness and how much I'd been helped by them. Though much of what Nietzsche wrote felt wrong, maybe there was something right in all the wrongness. In the aura of these mingled feelings, I grasped my yellow highlighter like a weapon, marking anything that seemed provocative or obscure so that my book glowed with haunted citric light. I read on, my stomach in knots, underlining passages, cradling his abuses to my little masochistic bosom. I was terrified of Nietzsche, and I fought him in my mind, echoing the cruel tenor of, with my notes in the margins. Total contradiction, smacks of dogma. What does that even mean? I was fighting, but then I would feel myself being pulled by the seductive violence in the writing, the convulsing shocks and stabs, the polemical overuse of exclamation points. I wanted to hide from the Krieg lights of Nietzsche's horrible, merciless scrutiny, but I wanted to be exposed to, and he could see me. He was calling to me with adjurations and warnings from the dead. By the time I left the library, there was so much exhortation and shouting and exclamation points that I felt slightly traumatized. I walked to my dorm room in a state of electrified horror. The Westlands lawn was dark and desolate like a graveyard. I was trembling with exhaustion. I felt the way I imagined prisoners in movies did when guards stripped them naked and sprayed them with some harsh cleansing acid, unhealthily cleaned, scoured to the point of illness. I lived in a Tudor-style dorm called Gilbert. It was idyllic, the shining opposite of USC's styrofoam and caulk monoliths. My room smelled of thyme and moldering wood. Outside my window were tapering vistas. In the winter, the roofs shone with snow-capped domes and gables. In the daytime, bald white patches of sunlight peeked through branches of trees. I shared a single room with Casper, a transfer student from Antioch. He mainly ignored me that first week. When I entered, I saw him at his desk facing the window. He was wearing only Fruit of the Loom underwear and reading a book. His body was small, almost a child's body, and his fingers were long and thin, like insect antennae. I tiptoed to my bed so as not to disturb him. Casper swiveled his chair around to face me. David, I can't do the voice. David, he said, did you have a productive evening? Oh, sorry, I hope I wasn't loud. No, he said, and he put down his book. I checked out the library. Casper was the oddest looking person I'd ever seen. His eyes were tiny and black and bulged like a beetle's. His cheeks were sunken in and set in relief against two protruding lips. The sides of his head were shaved and the top flopped downward, draping his head like a wet black shroud. And, did you get work done? Yeah, it was productive. And, what are you reading, pray tell? Beyond Good and Evil, I replied. His eyes seemed to dilate. Ah, Nietzsche, he said, and his face widened with an initially multivalent spreading of features and flesh that resolved into a kind of smile. Who is unthinkable without Schopenhauer, yes? Yes, I said, not knowing who Schopenhauer was or what he was talking about. Casper's speaking voice was bizarrely deep for someone so physically tiny. He sporadically switched octaves mid-sentence as if tuning an instrument, punctuating his words with bizarre noises. He gesticulated by holding his index and middle fingers together and canting his head right then left. His speech and movement seemed alien, almost mechanized, and seemed to point to some deeply alien spiritual referent. And what are you reading there? I asked him. He lifted the book. It was one of those penguin titles with a black border, something called Gargantua and Pantagruel. It sounded horrible to me, but exactly the kind of book I imagined him liking. What class is it for? It's not for class. It's for a literary journal I edit. Clearly, Casper was formidable. He was an intellectual, but the other students thought he was creepy. He was always marching up and down paths in solitary ennui with his flopping hair and bulging features, his tiny insect body swimming in the bulk of his trench coat. I defended him to people. I was drawn to Casper the way one might be drawn to a lost animal. I wanted to believe his ugliness betokened some quarried, gem-like beauty. Sharing a single room lent a proximal intimacy to our relationship. I could hear the tiny bones in his bare feet crack when he walked around. I could hear him singing Elvis Costello and Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others in his off-key baritone while showering. He was so vulnerable and weird. His oddness and smallness and physical ugliness made me want to care for him. And at the same time, I was magnetized by his brilliance. Starved as I was for instruction, an informal tutelage began between us. Casper became my teacher, and I threw myself into my education. I purchased something called a Baron's Vocabulary Builder and a pack of index cards. I made hundreds of flashcards with words I got from combing through the book. I taped the cards in a grid on the wall near my bed. Every morning, upon waking, I'd memorize definitions. I read Heidegger, Kafka, Derrida. I read essays with titles like, What is the Thingness of a Thing? Each day, I worked myself to the point of exhaustion. I didn't need sleep. I didn't need food. My own pleasure or well-being was not a consideration. It should feel grueling, I thought. I saw myself as a rare stone that needed polishing and cutting. I was a brilliant, gleaming diamond that only looked lumpen and black because I was untended. That's all I'm going to read. I'll imagine the virtual applause.
Yes. Thank you.
That was volume back up.
I love listening to you. That was good. But I had a question I wanted to start with, but listening to that, I was thinking about, this way that this became this book, which you didn't start off thinking about it as the tradition of a novel or a memoir of education, but that's in a big part, that's what it is. It's sort of like how you became who you are through this education, and starting from like Sweeney Todd is this early moment of an education in cruelty, right? And then you come here to Nietzsche, and it's also this echo of that idea of cruelty. And I wondered how, it sounds like you went back to the book and you had all your marginalia, but how did you return to all of these and decide like which touch points, like did you reread the Nietzsche, or did you actually remember very well those reactions to reading it for the first time?
No, I still had my college paperback of Beyond Good and Evil. In this case,
yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of those books. I saved them all.
Yeah.
And I had them, and I saw the notes in the margin, and I just cracked myself up. Because it was literally like smacks of dogma. It's like real. I could see myself at 18, 19 or whatever, getting so and I took everything so personally back then. And I don't know if you were like that. I just was so emotional. I think because I was looking for parents. Like I felt that I wasn't parented. So I wanted spiritually to be parented by people in books. And so I took it all very personally. And like, I remember when I realized that Heidegger was fascist, I flipped out. I had like a complete meltdown. I started sobbing. And I just thought I was looking for something to believe in. I was looking for a compass for my life. And I was looking especially at these philosophical texts for sort of grounding. So I think that's why the Nietzsche thing, it was very real for me back then, that my obsession with Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. And I did have, initially I started the book as almost like, I wanted to do kind of what my friend Olivia Lang ended up doing, which was she took artists and then sort of wrote about critical essays about the artists, and then in the margins was her own sort of little memoir, whatever, retrospection.
Right.
I thought I was going to be doing that. And, but then what happened was, so I had essays on Kafka, I had a whole thing on Alfred Hitchcock and this and that. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up going, this is not revealing enough, actually. This is not plumbing deep enough. And I need to just do something a little bit more conventional and less hybridized. So there are sort of like little bits of the critical essay stuff that I ended up keeping, but like the Kafka stuff went. I mean, all that other stuff, I threw it out. And I think I kept that because it felt like it was the Nietzsche stuff. I knew I could help dramatize something as part of a larger narrative experience. Mm-hmm. Through reading him and what it did to me. So that's why I kept it.
Right. Well, and there's others like that. I mean, Sweeney Todd is so essential in that opening scene and that early memory. But then there's others like The Champ. It's almost as if the book, I thought a lot about how the book is place sort of moves us through this lifetime, but also those sort of set pieces or characters of a movie or a book, right? And yes, your very like personal reaction to it, your sense of needing it as a parent or to tell you how to live or how to be. Yeah.
Right. Well, I was looking for verification, like,
yeah,
in terms of like what is in the world, what are the actual livable, real, substantive possibilities for who I could be in the world, based on, these examples that I get from culture. So even if it was like pop culture, if it was like Ricky Schroeder in this Franco Zeffirelli movie, The Champ, where he has a nervous breakdown at 8, I was like, oh, little blonde-haired boys, white boys get nervous breakdowns at 8 and like sob to the point where they're going to collapse. And I was like that too. When I was little, I was so sensitive, and I was like, this is great. So check. So now I could become part of that archetype. Okay, I got that.
Right.
I belong to the world in that one particular way. And so I kept sort of trying to match myself against what was empirically in the world, and like either how could I make it me, or how could it draw up and give shape to something that, like, some inchoate feeling or intuition that lived in me, so that I could build a vocabulary for being me, because I didn't have one.
Right.
And what was sort of fed to me by the culture around me and by my parents, my family was kind of messed up, like a lot of families, but I just sort of intuitively rejected all that. I was like, I'm not going to do it. And I was sent to this very religious Jewish school that was kind of Republican, and I just was like Teflon. It wasn't, I wanted to do it because I thought that's what I was supposed to do, is just like graft myself onto that life. But something in me really resisted it and was kind of, I don't know, I was like repulsed by it, even as I was trying to do it. And, so then it was like, okay, well, that's not me. That's not, there's some core thing in me that is resisting that. So then what, if I'm not resisting something, what am I attracted to, and like, what am I becoming? And it was fraught because I was closeted and gay on top of it all. So, and it was a very homophobic environment and era. So, figuring out what I was actually attracted to and what I could absorb and how I could assimilate all of these influences, and kind of, without becoming like a pastiche of a person, but actually using these things out in the world to build again like a syntax, like a legible syntax for a self. Like, that was my project.
Right. Well, I was thinking about that idea of, coming of age in this very homophobic culture, but time. And I think that, Gen X, for example, there may be this idea that things were already, or even we had this idea, things were already better or progressive, but they weren't at all. In retrospect, like, there was so much that was awful, right? And I think that your book reveals that. This, as in your play 3C, David has this wonderful play 3C that was in Chicago, some of you may have seen, that sort of takes sort of the subtext of the culture, right, which was very dark and very ugly, right? And yet we were told like everything was, free to be you and me, right? Culture, that we were in this time post civil rights era, etc. And so I think that reading your book, I think about how the culture sort of is shifting through this time, but definitely not through your childhood and young adulthood. And you even talk about the people in your family sort of later coming to acceptance along with the culture. But I wondered how much you thought about that in shaping the book, about that link between, your personal coming of age story and that the larger political historical moment.
I did think of it. I sort of, like, my impulse was to not overly contextualize the politics of the time. I did it a little bit when I talked a little bit about AIDS. I kept thinking about, like, if millennials read this book, they're going to be like, what is he talking about? Because it really is like, I'm just an old man, and it is such a different era. And it is so, we were like almost more tied to the 50s than to now. Like, in the 80s, like, the 80s were so retrograde. But when you're in that, when you're breathing in that oxygen, you're just like, I don't know, I guess it's okay. This is all we knew.
Yeah.
Like, what happened after that was unthinkable. Like, the shifts and the convulsions in the culture were completely unthinkable. But to answer your question, like, I don't know. I was actually quite ignorant of politics for the first, chunk of my life. Through even the beginning of my college years, I was like, what is that? What are politics? So I didn't want to sort of like gild that particularly, or sort of create some sort of irony, like, oh, I thought this, but really this was happening. I wanted people to be sort of invested in my psychology and keep the needle on the record, so to speak, on that, like, on my consciousness and where I was.
Well, it makes me think too of a question I wanted to ask earlier about the title. And this idea of, the title, which comes up in the very first chapter, and becomes a sort of symbolic note of otherness, or and I wondered, I think I remember that when you were in an earlier version, you had a different title for the book.
Well, I called it Save Us. I called it Save Us Superman because I thought it was going to be a different kind of a book.
Yeah.
And Lot 6 was the title of one of the chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize that I think that the book did become about this, because Lot 6, so in the Syrian Sephardic, like Syrian Jews owned a lot of these electronic stores and these retail stores like Crazy Eddie and The Wiz and all that. And in Midtown, they had all of these camera stores. And they were sort of like tourist traps. And in order to really built the customers, they wouldn't put the prices on the actual things, like the cameras. They would just put something that they called lot numbers. And the lot numbers were encoding the wholesale price of whatever it was. And it was usually doubled, right? So lot 6 was code for 3, as in queer, right? As in odd. And I sort of in the book talk about it not just in terms of being gay, but there's a sort of cultural queerness that I think I'm writing about, or a kind of an oddity and an alterity and an otherness that is deeper and more encompassing, and I think has more to do with my orientation as an artist, because I really resisted being an artist because I didn't want to be at odds with the world. I really wanted to belong to something in a non-contentious way. So I wanted, and so there are certain chapters where I'm dealing with these institutions or these people that really do just want me to provide something that's a little bit more along the lines of entertainment. And I want to entertain people, and I want to conform, and I don't want to push the status quo. And yet that there's some part of me that's like the Teflon part that was I can't live with this.
Right.
I can't, it's not me. There's something in me that needs to push against what I'm seeing and kind of attack it. Attack these structures and systems, even though I'm not a confrontational person. Right. All I want to do is get along with everybody. And I just want to make some money, have a nice life. I really that's what I want. It's just a really easy life. But there was a part of me that couldn't live with that. And so I had to figure it out through this very strange heuristic of trying to give up on myself, and then realizing I couldn't do that. And I think this lot 6 thing became an icon or an avatar when I was writing the book for that part of me that was resistant to being assimilated into the dominant culture. And so the book is in a weird way an homage to people like me, because there are lots of us, and lots of artists in particular who have that. Yeah. It's just an interesting thing. It was an interesting thing to learn about myself, but I had to learn about it by testing myself and seeing what I was actually made of, and what I really wanted and who I was and where I belonged.
Well, it's sort of beautiful to echo. I mean, one of the most heartbreaking parts to me is this early attempt to be part of, your community or your family already feeling apart, partly because you were born, you're so much younger than your siblings, and your family had lived in Nashville, and you didn't have the memories that they all had of that glory time, those glory days. But then trying to have these memories, and then with religion as well, right? As wanting to kind of, I'm going to be like this, but really, but none, as you're saying, the Teflon, none of that working. And it's very beautiful, because I think a lot of people try very hard. We're offered these sort of structures or these ways of knowing ourselves, and if they don't work, then what do you do? And I think it's sort of, I mean, it's painful. It's painful to say, oh, it doesn't work. But I think a lot of people don't need to say that, right? Or they're not driven to say that because it's so difficult to say, to kind of break through those structures. And I love the scene with the, when you go shopping, and it's on the Shabbos or something, and you're coming home with your brother yells at you about shopping, and sort of like
No, but it was on the highest holy day. You're not allowed. I was supposed to fast, and I had Italian food, and I didn't made myself not. I did things like very mechanically, like, no, I'm supposed to fast. Okay, I have to now eat, and I have to do all these things to break these, religious things, so that that people will know this now about me.
Yeah.
That I'm not like them. I can get away from it.
Yeah.
I felt very corseted by all of these expectations, and I was like, I want to take it off.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the yeshiva, writing about the yeshiva, returning to that, because it's such a wonderful part of it.
I mean, it's so funny because, like, I did have to go to this Jewish yeshiva, but I'm not aesthetically interested in yeshiva. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't, if I had my druthers, I wouldn't want to write about this little boy in a Jewish yeshiva. It's, like, not that interesting to me. So I did it as part of, like, this duty that I had to record this information.
Yeah.
But I was, like, embarrassed of it. I was like, oh, I don't want people to know this, like, I had to wear this yarmulke and do all this stuff and hang out with all these rabbis. Like, it was aesthetically, like, not pleasurable for me to write it, even though I think people really loved those scenes. Yeah.
Well, what was pleasurable to write in the book? I mean, I know parts were really hard to write. What parts were really fun?
I mean, it was fun in certain ways. Like, there were things that tickled me. I think it's actually a pretty funny book in a lot of ways. And the comedy was not deliberate. It just, I found it really hilarious as I was writing it. So I would be surprised by laughing as I was working. And I liked that. And then that happened a lot, where I would make myself laugh at what I was writing just because it seemed so crazy.
Well, I was laughing a lot, but something that you do really well is reveal kind of the place and the vibe of a place over and over again. And there, in what you read, we get that from Sarah Lawrence, which is so vivid. And then later, I loved, like, in Iowa City, and accepting or sort of falling into the banality of the Midwest, as you say, right? But becoming like, oh, that becomes very comfortable actually as a way to be. And I think that place, there's such a journey here in terms of place and linked to an identity, or to how your identity shifted. I mean, again, starting from that first scene where you're going into the city, going into Manhattan. The place is just from Manhattan back to Midwood, and just like the loss of all the excitement and the thrill and the sense of possibility that you could get from being in the audience or seeing Sweeney Todd, and then returning to Midwood and all of that sort of falling away, right? So like this journey is quite literal, but it's also kind of also about how we make ourselves replace, right?
Yeah, and in Iowa, it's funny, like, when I was writing the Iowa section, I realized it was the first really American place that I'd been to, because, like, New York really isn't American, and also neither is California in a certain way. I mean, it's all part of America, but it's not archetypally American. Being in the Midwest and wearing Gore-Tex and, like, you know, eating cheese sauces dipped in whatever. I mean, everything had a cheese sauce to go with it in Iowa. And, you know, and having a beer, I don't know what. And just walking around in this, like, very, very sort of quiet, scarily quiet. Because it is, Iowa City is so quiet. I remember walking home at night, my first night that I was there, and I was flipped out. And I had gone to see this Halloween movie in the middle of town. I was like, it was my first time there, and my first night in Iowa City. And I was like, also see this movie playing at the Angler. And I walked home and I was like, holy Christ, like, I've got to, like, I needed the Xanax. I was so terrified. And, like, it was just so, and then I wanted that. Then I was like, oh, yes, I want to be very American now. And I want to, like, I can wear these coats and dress like the way these people dress and gain 30 pounds and eat ice cream and cheese sauce. And that's great. And I could be this writer who lives in Iowa. Like, I think I kept going, like, the environments were sort of these petri dishes. And I was like, okay, now what happens when you put this little element in this petri dish? Then what happens? And who will I become? And maybe that's what I'm supposed to be. And I would go, you know, to this environment and think, oh, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be. I was very sponge-like. especially all through my 20s and my teens, I just sort of would try these. I had these like experimental selves, I guess, and I would just keep trying on these various ways to be, thinking like what something's gonna catch, and then that I'll just sort of like fall into a groove, and then that's me. It'll feel native. It'll feel like, oh, I'm home.
Yeah.
And I think what happened in the end was like, it's like the Wizard of Oz. Home is, isn't that what Wizard of Oz, like home isn't way inside your heart or something? But like I did collage together bits and pieces, like I said, this experiment. Like I really did embark on this multi-leveled experiment and changed the way I spoke, changed the way I dressed a zillion times, changed my styles, changed my aesthetics, changed this, changed that. But I did keep things too. Like little bits like grew, like little parts of the cutting from that plant like grew inside of me, and sort of in this very complicated way informed me and illuminated parts of me that I think were maybe either repressed or just unformed. So somehow, like when I was in my teens and 20s, I felt really sick to my stomach most of the time. Like I wasn't comfortable with who I was. I was scared. I didn't feel at home in myself. I can't explain that feeling. I just felt like I was like in like an armature. I just felt like I just felt scared and like alone. And like alone inside myself. I couldn't comfort myself either. And as I got older, I sort of like formed myself. And I remember like, and it was maybe right around the time of Iowa or after Iowa, where I was like, no, I don't feel that way anymore. Like I sort of like, I feel like this project, whatever it was, like I completed this project. You know what I mean? And it was coextensive with me really becoming a writer, really becoming and taking it seriously as a discipline. I think they go together somehow.
Yeah. Well, it feels like this very clear movement from New York and Los Angeles, a lot of emphasis on the superficial and fashion, of your childhood and kind of looking to fashion. And then in Iowa, you don't have to, worry about that. It goes to this internal space. It's very, and then you're sort of celebrated for that, or people are responding to that, right? In Iowa. So I like that, Iowa. But now you're back in Los Angeles. So,
because I'm superficial again. That's what happened to me. I had to be superficial. I couldn't deal with all that depth. No. No, but it's not. But I don't think it's not that those places are necessarily superficial. But you can certainly, and especially like in the 80s, especially, you could latch on to. I mean, really, New York was so sceney, and I was a teenager. So, I mean, there's a whole section in the book where I talk about fashion. It's just like all about, I became obsessed with high fashion.
Right.
And I just wanted to like become this like expert in fashion. That's all I cared about. And that was really, was a symptom of me living in this cosmopolitan city and like going to Soho, which at the time was like super chic, and going, wow, what is this? It looks great. I mean, maybe this is like the apogee of being a person, going to Soho and to a club. Maybe if I have the right outfit and go to the right club, who knows what'll happen to me? I'll reach the heavens. And that's sort of how I felt at the time.
Yeah, of course. No, honestly, but I having lived in both New York and Los Angeles and spending time in Iowa City, I know that in those places, I see, on a very basic level, I see people and I'll be like, oh, I love what they're wearing or their style. I feel like that. Whereas in Iowa City, that never happens. and like, people are lovely, but I don't have to think about that. So.
You don't have to worry about being hot in Iowa, and especially if you're a gay man. I mean, I guess now there's like Garth Greenwell and 3 other gay men. But like when I was there, I think it was the same ratio. It was like 4 others. Do you know what I mean? The dating scene wasn't super active, so.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Deal with that dating. But I think there's a reason so many writers like are drawn to Iowa or find comfort or do their work there too. It's sort of in between. So do we have questions now, Mandy? Should we move to audience questions? Okay.
Yeah, we have a question from the chat. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
I can.
To what extent do you think your relationship with theater influences your prose writing? For example, how does your role as a playwright interact with that as a writer?
That's a really good question. It was actually very, very difficult for me to. There is a relationship I realized later, particularly when I was structuring the book and I really had to figure out how to give it a shape because it was so shapeless for such a long time. And I was like, all right, I'm going to shape it like one of my plays. You know, that's something I came to very late. But in terms of establishing like a persona and a narrative voice and figuring out sort of like the musicality of language and dialogue and how they go together, and also sort of like, I don't know if it's drawing up memories is exactly how I'd phrase what I did, but sort of composing the memories or finding the syntax to compress information that was maybe a memory or something. That was a very strange process. That was like an incredibly weird thing for me to have to figure out how to do. I would say about 70% of it was like starting from scratch. Like I had to learn. It was like becoming an architect for me personally. And I had no idea I didn't know what it felt like. Like I work with a director sometimes and she says when we get to a really horrible point in the process, I've been here before and I know we'll get out of this because I remember being here another time in a different process. And so with this book, I didn't have that to fall back on. I was like, I have no idea where I am. I was totally, totally lost. So, I mean, I actually had to read books. I ordered books about how to become a developmental editor because I was so flipped out. And, you know, my editor left HarperCollins as soon as I gave in my first, like, sort of quasi draft. And I had help, and Jonathan Burnham stepped in, and he's a great editor, but he didn't have a ton of time to give to me. So I was really, like, doing a lot of the editing myself. And it was very challenging. And had nothing to do with anything I'd ever done in a play. Plays are so easy. Plays are so easy compared to long form prose. There's no question.
I have a question. We talked a little bit about this before the call, but how has your experience of being on book tour and like everything post-publication differed from your experience in the theater?
Well, you know, I haven't really done a book tour because of what's going on with the pandemic. And, you know, I'm doing readings here and there. But I have to say, like, you know, we haven't gotten all of our reviews yet. So I'm still really waiting for reviews. In the theater, it's like, it's an event, right? It's a closed experience. We have previews, opening, run, closing. And a book it's just out in the world forever and ever and ever. And I think, you know, I'm not used to that metabolism at all. And I'm not used to this feeling of like, where are all the reviews and where's all the press? Like usually in a play, I just get press like the first week. I just do all my press and then I'm done. People go buy their tickets and that's the end of it. It just feels really, the open-endedness feels kind of scary to me. But at the same time, like there is something liberating about like the idea that this book could just be around and grow in readership the way just in its own little idiopathic way. And you can't really control it. You can't see people reading it and like check to see if they like it. Like in the theater, sometimes you can see people's faces if you think they're like liking your play or not. So it's sort of like you have to let go in that respect.
Yeah, for sure. This is a completely different environment, you know, in the current pandemic than it was before. But yeah. What are you working on next?
I am actually writing another book. I don't know why I'm doing that, but I am. I started it a few months ago. I'm working on that. I'm doing this play Stereophonic that was supposed to open on Broadway in March, but now it's like on hold like everything else. And that's a play that I'm making with a composer named Will Butler, who's part of the band Arcade Fire. and it's a play about a band recording an album over the course of a year in 1976. And I'm doing another play about Brian Wilson. I'm doing all these music plays. I don't know, somehow that became my area of expertise. But Brian Wilson is working with me and a director named Lila Neugebauer to build a new play about Brian's making the Smile album, which he abandoned for 35 years and came back to it and released it much later in his life. And it's kind of a brilliant album, and so it's sort of like the Citizen Kane like exploration of like why he did that and what happened to him. Like why would a creator abandon his creation like that? Brian is fascinating. He's such an interesting person, so brilliant. Just those things, and like, you know, plays and stuff like that. I don't really know what I'm doing because I'm like, what am I doing? Like, when will there be theater again? I have no idea. It's such a sort of strangely unclear moment. So, but you know, you're just right into the void. I mean, I do that anyway, in a sense, right? You just like all right, I don't know. I'll just see what happens.
Would you write anything for like Zoom or for online version of theater?
I mean, no. I know people do it and they like it.
Yeah.
I just don't really, I'm not inspired to do it. And I really like theater to be like with an audience in a room. I really do. And I feel like the ritual aspect of it I think the event of it is so important to me. And the liveness of it is the thing that I think distinguishes it. I know there are lots of writers who don't agree with that. But that's just for me personally. That's why I want to see it. And I think people might think that that's retrograde that I'm saying that, but I can't help it. So I just won't do it. But I am going to watch, like there are plays, like Sam Hunter's play, The Few was on, they streamed it. It's a great play. I watched it. And then they're streaming Heroes of the Fourth Turning, another play that I missed in New York. So I'm going to see that. So I sort of, and Richard Nelson did a play called, it's part of that Apple.
What do we need to talk about or something?
Yeah, like what do we need to talk about something? And I started watching it, and then the Public Theater I said, oh, I'll watch it the rest of it tomorrow, and then they took it off YouTube, and I got really upset about it because I was like, I was really getting into it. It looked good. He sort of knew how to exploit the medium of this. You know, he knew how to do it. I'm so like Luddite. I don't know. I don't think I'd be good at it.
Those characters already made and they had relationships, so it was just like moving them into this moment, right?
Right, because he has these plays. It's like this one family, the Apple family, and it's just he just keeps making plays about them. It's so interesting. I want to do something like that because it must be so much fun to just keep returning to the same characters for literally decades.
Yeah,
that's what he's doing. It's
right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. I want to thank you guys for joining me. This was so much fun. Everyone, you can buy the book on our website or wherever books are sold. It's a beautiful book, I can attest. They did a great job. Thank you both for joining us. Yeah, hold it up.
Yeah, buy the book, support the bookstore.
Look at that.
Yeah. And we'll see you guys around. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.